Hello, accelerated chemistry students. This is Ms. Chrysofolia, and this is your Chapter 1, Section 3 video notes, and they're called Think Like a Scientist. So, science is an experimental concept. When you look at things, you have to explain why in science. You can't just state a fact. There has to be reasons why. So, the word chemistry comes from the word alchemy. And way back when, alchemists were searching for ways to change metals into more profitable metals. So they were looking to change things like lead into gold, and because gold at that time was more valuable. So they developed tools and techniques to work with these metals, and they were the ones that designed beakers, flasks, tongs, funnels, mortar, and pestles. And all of these things we use in chemistry today. You will actually use all of these equipment to complete experiments with me throughout the course of the year. So Anton Lavoisier came around in the late 1700s, and he helped transform chemistry from a science of observation to a science of measurement that we know it as today. So when alchemists used to get around and early philosophers used to get around, they didn't really do many experiments to discuss and to prove their ideas. They would sit around and talk about them, and that would be sufficient enough. But Anton Lavoisier came around and said, no, we actually need to measure and to prove what is going on in the world. So he is known for creating a balance that could measure mass to 0.0005 grams. And then he also was able to show that oxygen is required for materials to burn. He ran a bunch of experiments and realized that oxygen was the key role in combustion reactions, and he is credited for that discovery. And many of you know that the process in order to come up with scientific thought is through the scientific method. So the scientific method has a systematic approach to solve problems. It's logical, it's step by step. It answers the questions that you have when you make simple observations. So there are different steps to a scientific method. First is making observations, then is proposing and testing hypotheses, developing theories, and then eventually those theories could become into law, or laws prove theories. And so let's start off with making observations. An observation is when you use your senses to obtain information. So we have 5 senses: hearing, smelling, feeling, tasting, and seeing. Just by looking at something and making an observation, you can decide what to test and how you want to test it, but it has to start off with something that you observe. Then from your observations, you can test a hypothesis. So hypotheses is a proposed explanation of an observation. So you see a problem, you hypothesize it, and then you come up with solutions. So for example, if you were to go to turn a flashlight on and it doesn't work, that is your observation, but then you would hypothesize why it doesn't work. Are the batteries dead? Is the battery in the wrong way? So then you would do experiments to figure out which of your hypotheses is true and which one is false. So then you test your hypothesis, and you test your hypothesis with an experiment. And an experiment is a procedure that is used to test your hypothesis. And in order to be an experiment, you have to have variables or factors that can change. So there are 2 kinds of variables in an experiment. There's an independent variable, and that is the variable that you change during the experiment. And then there's the dependent variable, and that's the variable that is observed during an experiment. So you always have 2 things. The independent variable is what you change, and then the dependent variable will change because the independent variable changed. The last thing when testing hypotheses that you need to think about is that in order for the results of the experiment to be accepted by the scientific community, the experiment has to be repeatable. And it has to be repeatable so many times that every time you do it, you get the same exact results. Just by doing something once, you can't say, yes, I solved this problem. It could be a fluke. It could be something went wrong during your experiment, or your experiment could have worked beautifully, but you can't reproduce it. And so you have to do the experiment over and over and over again. And as you see, when we talk about the history of the atom, that people kept experimenting and things kept changing as the years went on because they were making more advances in technology. And so when scientists publish their findings in scientific journals, they need to include the procedures as well as their results. This way, someone that wasn't in the lab with them could do the procedure over again. All of the labs that we're going to do this year have been done already, either by myself or other students. And so I know that they are going to work. And because I know they're going to work, we follow the procedures step by step by step because we want to get the same results that were given and that were determined when the experiment was written the first time. Also, sometimes experiments are too complicated. So a model is used to gain more understanding. So an online simulation or a gizmo learning simulation or different things, because especially in chemistry, some of these things are so small that you can't see them with the naked eye. So you have to come up with a computer model or something else that can help you understand what that scenario is or will help you represent an object or an event. And chemists use models to study chemical reactions and processes all the time. Like I said, some of these things are so complicated and so small that you have to complete a simulation or run a computer program to help input new data and predict what would happen. Then after testing your hypothesis comes developing theories. And once a hypothesis meets the test of repeated experimentation, it may become a theory. And a theory is a well-tested explanation for a broad set of observations. And theories over the years may need to be changed to explain new observations or future experiments. Scientific law is a concise statement that summarizes the results of many observations and experiments. And now, scientific law and scientific theory, sometimes they go back and forth, and sometimes it's confusing for students. So here's a flow chart. So if you start off with your observations, then you have a hypothesis. That hypothesis will lead you to experimentation, and that experiment can either lead you to a theory, and then more experimentation, and then eventually a law. So a theory is tested by more experiments and modified as necessary. And a law summarizes the results of many observations and experiments. So if we were to compare and contrast the scientific law and scientific theory, a law describes the relationship that you are seeing with your results from an experiment, where a theory explains it. So when you look at this experiment, observation, hypothesis, prediction circle, eventually you're going to get results, and that results can either be a summary or it can be an explanation, and that will determine whether or not it's a law or a theory. As well as, the scientific method, there are two things that are crucial in order for science to work and to work well. And the two are collaboration and communication. So collaboration is the first one. So scientists choose to collaborate. So some research problems are so complicated that one person can't really think through all the possible entities, or that person might not have the knowledge, the skills, the resources to solve that problem. So they reach out to somebody else, or they reach out to another research group or another university or another laboratory to try and help figure it out. And with any sort of group work, there are going to be some difficulties. So working in pairs and groups can be challenging. You could always have an alpha or someone that's always the boss. However, when it comes to working in group work, you have to remember that you are looking for the reward that comes at the end. You're looking for the content knowledge. You're looking for the new discovery. And that's what's going to be rewarding about your collaboration. After collaboration is communication. So when you're in a research group, you will communicate face-to-face with your lab partners that are sitting at the lab bench next to you or the lab bench across the room from you. If you are in a research group and you want to collaborate through emails, phone calls, or local or international conferences, that's another way to communicate your results, what you're doing in the lab. And then the final one is publishing in scientific journals. Scientific journals are collections of articles and basically lab reports that are written by scientists. They go into in-depth detail about their experiments and their findings and what their errors were and how they figured out what the data discovered and everything that came out of doing that experiment. They're very long and involved, but it's basically a longer lab report than you're going to have to do in class here. And scientific journals are the best and the most reliable source to get new chemistry and to get new ideas out there and to communicate with the science community. And that is because they are reviewed by experts before publishing. So once you write up your lab report or once you write up your article, you submit it to a committee and that committee reviews it. They look for experimental design errors, or they might challenge the conclusions that you discovered in your work. And then they ultimately have the say in whether or not it's going to get published. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, that's not fair, but also remember, these people that are on these committees are experts. They have published many articles. They are renowned in their field. And so their knowledge and their expertise in these ideas and in these experiments are crucial. And anything that is not good science will not get published. For us in America on the left, the biggest chemistry journal is called JACS. It's the Journal of American Chemical Society. And when you graduate from college and you go to be a chemist, that's the first thing they'll ask you to do is be a member of their society so that you can gain access to all the new chemistry that's being produced and all the new chemistry that is being researched in the world. And on the right side are a bunch of other different articles, journals that are found all over the world. Now, chemistry is one of those things that is worldwide. It's not just localized in America. And there are so many different research groups all over the world that are doing so many cool things in order to advance in chemistry. Now, this will be the end of your lesson 3 notes for chapter 1, and I'll see you tomorrow. And as always, all the information in these Google Slides has been acquired and adapted from Pearson Chemistry's 2012 edition textbook resources CD and pearsonchem.com. Thank you.